welcome to the Cook Memorial Public Library podcast, where we invite you to spend just a few minutes with the staff at Cook Library. I'm Nate Goss, and for this episode, we bring you another edition of Meet the Bookies. The Bookies, for those of you unfamiliar with the project, is a place on our website where you can read profiles of select library staff and then request personalized book, movie, or music suggestions from one of the bookies. To see that page, you should just head over to www.cooklib.org/bookies. But for the podcast, we wanted to give each bookie an episode so you can hear them talk about what they love in their own voice. So today we have Lindsay Petticourt, our Digital Services Librarian. You may also recognize her voice because she is one of the other hosts of this podcast, but today she's on the other side of the microphone to talk about what types of pop culture she likes. So welcome, Lindsay.
Thanks, Nate.
So I know it's actually a lot to ask to just list off all the things you like.
Mm-hmm.
So let's maybe just break it down a little bit.
Okay.
You're the Digital Services Librarian, which actually covers all the bases when it comes to pop culture because you have your hand in platforms that deal with books, movies, and music.
That's right.
So maybe let's just skim the surface of each one a little bit.
Okay.
So I guess I would ask, for the purpose of the bookies, what's your unique niche in your taste that would maybe set you apart from some of the other bookies?
Probably. So I really enjoy science fiction and fantasy. That's kind of the genres that tick all the boxes for me. But it's not just any science fiction. It's not just any fantasy. Epic fantasies where, say, George R.R. Martin's. I really enjoyed the show Game of Thrones, but I really cannot get into the books because that's not my type of fantasy. I think I prefer much more modern settings. And I really enjoy fantasy that touches on kind of the everyday and then does a little twist with it or a little spin with it. One of my favorites is Neil Gaiman's Neverwhere. And one of my favorites about that is it takes place in London. And so you get all these kind of touch points for modern day London. But most of it takes place in kind of an underworld London where all of these magical things happen. That's just right below the surface, but nobody in regular London really notices it.
Do you mean literally below the surface, like underground, or more just sort of like
yes,
in plain
but
sight?
Also
but
no.
Not, yeah,
yes.
Okay.
Literally a little bit, but a lot of it is it's just in a slightly different realm outside of our reality.
Sure. Yeah.
Those are the types of fantasy that I tend to enjoy. Another one, it also happens to be set in London, but I don't think those are the only factors that tie them. It
doesn't have to be British,
right? It doesn't have to be British. They just happen to be.
It helps.
Is a series by Ben Aronovich called Rivers of London, and it is actually. If it didn't have the fantasy element, it would fall squarely into a police procedural of there's a crime, here's how the police go about solving it. Except the main protagonist in the first book, he realizes that he can see ghosts, and he's kind of recruited into this slightly different aspect of the police force that deals with all the supernatural aspects of policing that the regular police force really just doesn't want to deal with and they can ignore. So it's all about dealing with the weird stuff that happens in London that's crime-related but is also by, say, fairies. Or the series is called Rivers of London because the rivers have gods and goddesses that kind of oversee them. And because the river goes through all of London and it has all these tributaries, so the river has a lot of influence.
What about the sci-fi element? Do you have a recommendation of, maybe the type of sci-fi that you like? Now, are you talking science fiction that, the sort of caricature of that is like the outer space kind of thing, intergalactic battles type stuff. Is that the kind of sci-fi we're talking here? Or
for the most part, that is not
okay.
what I like to read, except for there is a graphic novel series that falls squarely in that called Saga.
Yeah.
They really call it a space opera. And that's by Brian K. Vaughan and illustrators Fiona Staples. It was kind of the first outer space science fiction book that really grabbed me. But it's more of kind of a pseudo Romeo and Juliet love story going on with people from different worlds, and just the imagination that went into creating all these different worlds and what not people, but humanoids from these different worlds might look like. So that's probably the only like outer space science fiction that I've really read. What I tend to like science fiction wise falls more into what has been termed by some as weird fiction, which I feel like could cover a lot. And there's no real agreed upon definition for it. But it's probably most epitomized by author Jeff Vandermeer. A couple years ago, he wrote the Southern Reach trilogy, which was very popular. The first book in that was called Annihilation. And for me, that book kind of encompasses what I like about science fiction. In the book Annihilation, these women scientists are sent into this area. They call it Area X because weird stuff is happening there and they can't quite figure it out. So these women are sent on an expedition to do some research. So there's possibly some scientific explanation behind what's going on.
Yeah.
But it's just creepy the whole time. Like nature slightly skewed. Like nature with some sort of alien foreign element to it.
Yeah.
Probably my favorite thing about the book is not so much the story itself, despite that being very good. It's the feeling of you're kind of creeped out the whole time. And you can't quite put your finger on why you're creeped out. Like, why is this making me feel so unsettled? I'm just reading about her walking down a stairwell. And that's kind of where weird fiction sits. It's supernatural with a kind of science fiction bent to it.
I was going to say, it has almost a supernatural feel to it.
Right, but it's not a ghost story. It's not like werewolves or vampires.
It almost seems like it's sci-fi with a little supernatural bent, but also it seems like there's kind of a creepy mystery to it. Like you're sort of trying to figure out the meaning behind any of this, you know?
Right. And something that I enjoy that Vandermeer did in the Southern Reach trilogy, and I know it's not quite everybody's cup of tea, but you don't find out all the answers. And I kind of appreciate that because that's life. I mean, I might not be out investigating weird alien ecosystems that have appeared on Earth, but that's still life. We don't know why for everything.
Yeah. There's very few cheap resolutions in life. You know, you mentioned earlier, Saga. And I know you like comics. And so I was just kind of wondering, first of all, you know, what kind of comics originally got you into comics? And then also, you know, what are some, for people who maybe are willing to give them a try, but they haven't really gone there yet, and they want to know what's a good comic to start with, what would you recommend? I mean, I know that depends probably on their preferences, but for you maybe, what were some of the comics that really got you into comics?
Probably my first one that really stuck with me was the Sandman series by Neil Gaiman. And it's kind of this epic series that follows Dream, the not quite god, and then his family, his siblings include Despair, Desire, Destiny, and then Delirium. And so it's kind of all these, I will call them gods for a shorthand, and kind of how they affect the world, their world, our world. But it was so epic. Reading those, I couldn't see how it could be done with just words. But it's quite a long series and is kind of one of the classic go-tos for understanding what can be done in the comics and graphic novel format.
Yeah, something that's sort of it converts a lot of people to comics.
It definitely does. It definitely does. Let's see. Another go-to for me, it's a pair of books by Alison Bechdel called Fun Home, and then Are You My Mother is kind of the sequel to Fun Home. Yeah. But these are biographies, essentially. Fun Home is about growing up with her father and kind of the mysteries surrounding his death, possible suicide. And Are You My Mother is about her mother and kind of the secrets that were kept in their family while she was growing up. And Allison, she writes and draws the stories, and you really get into her mind.
Yeah, I think that's good to recommend something like that too, because I think if you are someone who just has a very surface level idea of comics, you could really start to think that comics are mostly just superheroes and Marvel, DC.
Right. It's very easy to think that. And
this is entirely different, though.
This is entirely different. Graphic novels are a format, so like a movie or like a book. They're not a genre unto themselves. So you can have a whole range of different stories. There are probably a lot of graphic novels that I wouldn't like to read because they're just not the types of stories that I enjoy. But I think there's graphic novels out there for pretty much any genre that any person might like. Nonfiction, fiction, children, adults. It's really broad.
All right, so I think we talked a lot about your more kind of all-time favorites or stuff that has really stuck with you over the years. Just to get a pulse of what you're into now, what are some things that you've been reading lately?
So what I've been reading lately is actually a lot of nonfiction, because last year my husband and I bought a house, and it's an older house, and it needs a lot of work.
Okay.
And the yard needs a lot of work, and everything needs a lot of work. So I've been checking out a whole lot of house books and landscaping books and gardening books, because these are all kind of skills.
Putting your tool belt on and getting ready to get to work. Yeah.
Yes. So I've probably heavily utilized our do-it-yourself section, trying to get ideas for things like with landscaping or just how to do things.
Yeah.
How to replace the pipe under your sink. Yeah, I usually end up checking out like 5 a week just to sit.
You're an expert now.
Sit and peruse.
Oh, okay.
There's no heavy in-depth reading with those.
All right. Well, Lindsay, thank you so much for coming on and sharing some of your suggestions and helping us get to know you a little bit better as a bookie.
Yeah, it was great.
Lindsay did give us a lot of great suggestions on this podcast episode, and you can find all of them over on our website, www.cooklib.org. Or if you want to get even more suggestions from her or any of the other bookies, you'll want to visit the Bookies page and look over some of the profiles. Once again, that address is cooklib.org/bookies, BOOKIES. We always want to mention the library's blog, Shelf Life, where a lot of us at the library regularly talk about what we're into lately, and also write up helpful genealogy articles and fun local history stories. That blog's address is shelflife.cooklib.org. If you ever want to leave some feedback, maybe suggest some topics for future episodes, you can always send us a message. Webmaster@cooklib.org is the email address for that. If you like what you're hearing, tell everyone you know about the podcast and let them know they can subscribe in iTunes or anywhere they like to get their podcasts. Speaking of iTunes, one of the best ways you can help us out is by leaving us a nice rating there. We will be back soon, but until then, keep reading, keep watching, and keep listening.